Welcome back to a completely brand new video. So in this video, we are going to unlock the exact KPIs that I used behind a product that's now doing over $3 million in annual revenue on Amazon. And we were able to achieve that mark in just 4 months. But really, I'm going to dissect and show you what are the exact KPIs that I looked for in that product before we even ended up launching it. And remember, these are the exact KPIs that most seven figures wish they knew before blowing thousands on failed launches. Because let's be real, most Amazon sellers lose before they even launch. They chase trending products, they validate based on hope, not hard data, they rely on superficial metrics that everybody else is tracking. And then they wonder why their inventory sits dead in the Amazon's warehouse for months. Not here, not you, not anymore. This document, and remember, like this document isn't going to be some recycled checklist like everybody else. Like most of the self-proclaimed Amazon gurus talks about BSR, like look for products under that BSR or look for products over 10K search volume. Like these are, of course, these used to work, but they only used to work a decade ago. Amazon has changed, customers have changed, and now if you are still relying on a rigid product criteria checklist and you're trying to force every niche into one, then really you are missing out big time, my friend. So this document is going to be a complete list of 50 plus peril tested product validation KPIs that are built to dissect, destroy, and dominate any product idea before you ever spend a dollar. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So what you are seeing on your screen is the entire product validation playbook that I've prepared just for you guys. So you can see it's a 10-page document filled with great stuff, and it's not just some fluff like everybody else out there, right? As I said, it's not just about some rigid product criteria. In fact, it's something that you can really use in any product category, no matter if you are a new seller or you have been selling since the past decade or so. It works for everyone, right? Now, let me just scroll above so we can start. Yeah, so let's start with the first one. But before we even go further, let me show you what this entire table means. So you can see this is a drop down, important, not important. So this is where you can basically mark whether this particular criteria is important for you or not important. Because again, one criteria that is made for, like, one criteria will not work for every other Amazon seller, right? For example, a brand that is doing $100 million and on Amazon will have a different product criteria compared to a completely beginner Amazon seller, right? Because they both have different resources, they both have different abilities to compete with big guys, right? So this is why I have included this drop down that you can use. And then this product criteria sheet is also going to be super flexible. So for example, in everything that is highlighted in yellow, you can actually it's like dynamic, it's a dynamic number, so you can change it. So for example, if your revenue target is above $30,000, then you can change it to, let's say, 50,000, or if it's below 30,000, you can change it to $10,000. But everything else is going to stay the same, because again, this video is going to be about the exact winning criteria or the exact winning KPIs that I use behind that $3 million product on Amazon. So let's start with the first one, the trap of high sales and low reviews. So most sellers get excited by looking at listings like this. So you can see 2000 plus sales, a good pricing, like not competitive pricing, good sales, and super low reviews, 120 reviews. But what they miss is the complete picture. What appears to be a less competitive market might be the hardest to compete with. This is why it's important to make sure that the product does not just have high sales and low reviews, but should also not be strong in any other fields, such as driving tons of external traffic via their branded keywords on Amazon, right? So what I mean by that is that, most of the time sellers get excited by just looking at the sales numbers and then the reviews numbers, but what they're not looking at is the complete picture, right? So they need to ask themselves, how is that seller getting his sales from, right? Maybe the reason why he has high sales despite having super low reviews is maybe he's a very big brand, right? Or maybe he is driving tons of external traffic, or maybe he has a lot of branded keyword search volume, right, that he's just targeting towards that one listing. Or maybe he has a super competitive price, or maybe he's an Amazon seller, right? So you need to really check all these boxes before getting excited by looking at a product listing. So this is one thing that you need to make sure when you are validating your next big product. The second criteria is demand and trends. So most sellers look at the main keyword to find the demand of a product, right? So for example, if you are selling, let's take the famous example of garlic press, then most sellers will just look at the keyword of the main keyword garlic press, and then they will try to estimate. They will look at the helium 10 search volume, and then they will say, yes, this is the total demand of the product. But the reality is that customers are not just searching for a product through one keyword, but they're searching for it with many different keywords. So you can see over here, you can see for this particular example, you can see 90 keywords and 760,000 search volume, right? So search volume per month. So here the product has a total demand of 763,000 plus customers searching for it monthly through the use of 90 keywords. Now, if I scroll below, and you can also see over here must be high demand, ideally above 100,000 plus monthly search volume, the combined search volume, right? So I'm not talking about just one keyword search volume here. Then we come to selling price. Now selling price is really important because the higher the selling price, the more the launch budget required, the lesser the competition, since not many sellers have huge launch budgets to sell on Amazon. So as you start to raise your price, like if you are targeting products, let's say that are above $50, then you are really going to find some golden product opportunities, because not every seller will have, let's say, a launch budget to put that much amount in the product launch, especially when it's their first product, right? But however, you need to keep in mind that price is also a direct indicator of your sales velocity. While a higher price comes with its own perks, which is less competitive niches, it might cause the demand to be low as well, which is simply the law of demand in microeconomics. So you can see this law of demand graph, right? So price, demand, and quantity. So you can see as you start to raise the prices, the quantity demanded for a product decreases. And so this is something that you need to keep in mind before you find your next big product. So I've written over here, ideal range is between $50 to $100, right? You can of course change this as it's highlighted in yellow color. Then we look at seasonality versus fluctuating demand. Now, there has been a big misconception between a product being seasonal and fluctuating in demand, right? These are both two different things. Seasonality is a predictable pattern, right? For example, sales going up during holidays or during Q4 or Christmas, that is what a seasonal product is. While demand fluctuation indicates all kinds of changes in demand, whether they are predictable or not. It could be caused by trends, news, influencer post, price drops, or even unexpected events. So you can see this graph over here between seasonality and demand fluctuation. So you can see demand fluctuation is really uncertain, right? It will change at really any instant. It could change, right? Whereas for seasonality, there are specific periods just dedicated to non-peak seasons and peak seasons, right? So it's a predictable pattern. And so what you need to understand is that before you even call your next big product idea seasonal, just make sure that it's not just a short-term spike caused by some random demand fluctuation, because the reality is that you can have the best product and you can actually not end up launching that best product just because you see that it's seasonal, but maybe it's not seasonal at all. It actually happened with one of our products. We thought it was seasonal, but it was really not, and we ended up launching that product and it's doing really great on Amazon right now, right? And I've also written over here, must be non-seasonal if you want products that sell the entire year. Then we look at projected reviews and review velocity. Now this is super important as well. So looking solely at the reviews to figure out if you can compete against your competitors is the best way to ensure your doomsday. Why? Because a competitor with just 300 reviews but a 50% review velocity, which is basically the speed at which the reviews are growing every month, will have that same competitor with 300 reviews will have 1,012 reviews by the time your product even becomes live on Amazon, which I'm assuming is 2 to 3 months, right? So what appear to be a weak competitor right now might actually be very hard to compete with by the time your product becomes live on Amazon, because because of course for most products the lead time is usually around 2 months, right, including shipping, especially if you're shipping from China via ocean. But you need to understand that by the time your product becomes live on Amazon, your competitors' reviews are just going to increase, right? So you need to forecast that review increase in your research, which is what I call as projected reviews. So you can see I've written the formula for projected reviews over here. So R times 1 plus V in the brackets and N to the exponential. So you can just put this formula in your calculator. So you can see R is the current number of reviews. V is the monthly review velocity as a decimal, which is, for example, if, and you can, by the way, you can easily find it using helium 10. So when you are validating the product, just run helium 10's x-ray on your product search engine result page, and then helium 10 will show you the review velocity of the product. And then you can see you need to put the review velocity in decimal format. So for example, if it's 50%, you need to put it as 0.5. Then N is basically the number of months or your lead time after which your product becomes live on Amazon, right? So this is something that you need to keep in mind. And then you also need to see how much the projected reviews should be for your case. For example, in the ideal case, the projected reviews after 2 months must still be less than 500, just to make sure that by the time my product becomes live on Amazon, I'm still able to compete against these guys. Then ranking competition. Now, most of the times we just look at the reviews to find or determine the competition, the competitive strength of a market. But this is not a good idea. So competition at the keyword or ranking level is equally important. Every listing has an associated ranking potential with it. The better your SEO plus advertising, the higher the ranking potential you have. And the higher the ranking potential, the higher your share of voice or search volume coverage across all the niche keywords. If most sellers like 92, so for example, I've shown this one example. I've used TerraDive over here. So if most sellers like 92% in this case have very weak SEO strength or very weak or very low share of voice across all the top keywords in a market, then ranking becomes fairly easy since all these competitors, all of your competitors are either not utilizing all the keywords of the niche in their listing, or even if they are, they're just not ranking on the top first page of Amazon. And you and I, we both know that 85% of sales happen on the top first page. And I've also written over here in the criteria that it must be less than 40%, right? So less than 40% of competitors should be strong or very strong in terms of Amazon SEO, and 60% or more should be very weak or weak in terms of Amazon SEO or whatever you want to call it, right? Amazon SEO strength or search volume coverage or share of voice, you can call it anything. Then we look at the number of niche keywords. Now this is important as well, right? So if the niche only has 20 to 30 keywords, then the chances of every seller guessing what those keywords are, they significantly increases compared to a niche that has, let's say, 90 keywords, right? And so this is why the more keywords there are, the easier it becomes to rank your product, since there will always be some keywords which your competitors are missing out on. And ideally, there must be more than 100 keywords in a market, right? Then keyword search volume distribution. Now we saw that there must be more than 30 keywords, right? But these keywords will not be of any use if 90% of the search volume is just concentrated on that one keyword, right? Because then everybody will be going after that one keyword. And so what's even the point of having 99 other keywords? And so you need to make sure that the top 10 to 20 keywords have an evenly distributed search volume distribution, right? So you can look at this graph. It's slightly uneven and saturated amongst these two keywords, right? The search volume is saturated on these top two keywords, but it should really be evenly distributed, right? You should really see an evenly distributed graph over here. Then we look at room for new sellers. Now this is equally important as well. So most sellers avoid old niches, right? Niches that have existed since decades ago, saying that they are too competitive. But what if I tell you that these are the ones worth capturing? You see, in any niche, if you can find new sellers, and by new sellers I mean that their launch date have been less than 12 months and they're crushing the marketplace, which means that they have high sales, then it basically indicates that there is in fact room for new sellers to disrupt the old niche, where old sellers have sticked religiously to the old cookie cutter strategies on Amazon that worked in 2016, right? So most of these old niches that you are seeing, most of the times what I've seen is that these types of niches, because the sellers have been there, and because all these sellers have been in those markets since decades, they are still relying on the old cookie cutter product research, product launch strategies, right? Advertising strategies, all of that stuff. And so if you find a few new sellers who are really disrupting these types of old niches, then that is a golden opportunity, because you can actually launch in that market and compete against all of those old guys who are still relying on the old outdated methods. And you can see over here, I've written the formula that at least 30% of sellers must have a launch date less than 12 months with sales more than whatever your target revenue is, right? Then we look at sales distribution across variations. Now, this is super important. So if you take a look at this particular listing, it looks quite appealing, right? 350 reviews, 1755 sales. But what most sellers miss is that these sales numbers are for the entire parent listing. And Helium 10 has recently started showing the parent level sales and the ASIN level sales, right? Because these sales will be distributed amongst all the different variations that a competitor has. So for example, for this product, it had 14 different variations, right? So the sales numbers are actually distributed across all the 14 variations depending on the review share percentage, right? Because technically, the more reviews a variation has, technically it has also sold the highest, and so it will have the highest monthly sales. So you can see that Helium 10 recently started showing ASIN level data, so you should only look at sales at the ASIN levels, right? Because in reality, you can have a product that, let's say, is doing $100,000 per month, but if it has, let's say, 30 or 40 different variations, and when you look at the ASIN level sales data, then maybe that product is really doing $20,000 or $10,000 per month, right? So that's just something that you should make sure. And again, the criteria is sales at ASIN level must be more than whatever your target revenue is. Then we look at profitability, right? And this might sound easy and obvious, right? But most sellers still calculate it the wrong way. And what I mean by that is that especially when you don't have your own product's dimensions with you, then how are you going to calculate the profitability, right? Because every niche has a lot of variations, and all the variations are not going to have the same product size and weight, right? So this is where you need to make sure which variation you are taking into account when you are doing the profitability analysis, right? And so the question is, which variation has the highest market share, right? Because you can't just launch 20 or 30 different variations all at once. You just want to launch the best selling variation. And so you need to find the best selling variation in the market. You need to look at the market share of each particular variation in the market and then calculate the margins for that variation, because the reality is that one variation could be really profitable while the other one would be bleeding a lot of money, right? So this is why it's really important to keep variation in mind when you are calculating your margins. And the criteria is it must have a 30% plus net profit margin after ads. I've also written over here the profitability calculator right over here. And one more quick tip I've included: while you are finding the best selling variation, make sure that the sales of the variation is actually rising, because sometimes a high demand variation for the time being might actually be slowly declining in popularity and getting replaced with another one. So if you see over here, now this particular product, these are the sales data for one of the variations, right? And this variation was like, it had almost like 50 to 60% market share of the entire market compared to 10 other variations, right? So this was the high demand and most popular variation. But when I looked at the micro level, when I looked at the sales data of this variation, I saw that the sales were declining, and actually the sales data for another variation, which was not too popular at the time being, the sales data for that variation was rising. And so this is where you can really fall in the trap of a high demand variation as well. So really make sure to check what is the trend of the sales of that variation, whether the trend is going up or it's going down for that variation. Then we look at big brands disguised as new sellers. So you see most big brands on Amazon operate smaller sub-brands in the same or different market with a unique positioning. And this is especially the case in supplements where two brands with the same formulation but different brand positioning may be owned by the same parent company. This is why you must always check if the brand you plan to compete with is actually a new easy to conquer brand or just another big brand disguised as a new seller. So what I mean over here is that sometimes most of these big brands that you see on Amazon, they actually have a lot of other small brands under the same parent company. And so every time you are trying to compete or you are planning to compete against a brand that looks super easy to compete with, for example, they have less than 20, for example, they could have 20 or 30 reviews on their listing and have super high sales, then you need to ask yourself whether it is a big brand in disguise or not. And the quick way to do that is that you can just look at whether that brand has the same parent company as the big brands, right? Now, once you have done that, once you have seen that yes, this is someone who you can compete against with because he is actually a new seller instead of a big brand disguised as a new seller, then you look for the room for differentiation or market gaps. Now here's where I'm going to break the BS, right? So the term market gap has been used too vaguely in the Amazon space. And look, I'm going to be frank with you. Everyone throws it around, but most sellers mistake it for simply low competition or a few bad reviews. So every time someone sees few bad reviews, they will see, oh, I have identified market gaps. But in reality, a true market gap is one where there's a clear disconnect between what customers want and what the current products deliver. And so solving this disconnect between what customers want and what they're getting, it can take many forms, right? So you can offer a stronger branding than the rest of your competitors, maybe a much appealing product images, all of that creative side of things. Then the other way to solve this disconnect is to use FBA to provide faster shipping in a market that is really dominated by all the FBM sellers who are providing super long delivery days, right? And this works incredibly well once you raise your selling price targets to above $100 once you start, because most of the times when you will see products that are super bulky, then you will see that most of the times in those types of niches where products are super bulky, you will find all the FBM guys dominating, right? And so the problem is that they all have super slow delivery times. And so if you can come here and do FBA, or maybe you have your own seller fulfilled delivery network, and you can actually compete on delivery times, then yes, you should go ahead, and that can be another form of differentiation. Then we look at improving the product itself is another form of differentiation, quite obvious one. You can have a better design, added features, or material upgrades. Then the fourth one is creating premium packaging, and this works especially well in gifting markets, and you can actually use that premium package in your main image, especially when your competitors are not doing it. This will significantly boost your click-through rate on Amazon as well. And then we have the last one, positioning the same product towards an unserved or overlooked audience. You can find this works really incredibly well in supplements, where you are, again, just like I talked before, you can have the same product, the same formulations, but you can find an unserved audience. For example, if all the products are being offered to men and you find a micro niche of female who are also searching for that product, then you can actually position your brand, position your entire product, your entire creatives to specifically for women. And these are just some of the many subtle edges that most sellers miss completely. However, don't fall in the trap of over-innovating or completely redesigning the product just to see your supplier ask for ridiculously high MOQs or tooling cost, right? And so you should only innovate within the circle of what customers actually want. Then we have products prone to bad reviews. So some products by nature will attract negative customer reviews and more returns, right? Especially products that have a lot of moving pieces, or products that have a lot of assembly items, or products with a very complex design, right? So you definitely don't want to sell in those types of markets. Otherwise, you will end up with one of these conversion rate sucker badges on the top scroll of your product listing saying frequently returned item. You can see over here, right? And so one good way to avoid this badge is to do your pre-launch homework by looking for the niche's return rate on Amazon inside of the Amazon's product opportunity explorer, right? And you can see the criteria over here as well. So return rates must be less than the average 5% return rate on Amazon. Now, then we have CVR competition in terms of variations. And what I mean by that is that you should not sell in a market where there are a lot of variations on one listing of a product. And there are two reasons for it. So more variations on your competitor's listing means a higher conversion rate for them, since customers have multiple options to choose from. And so if you even plan to launch multiple variations, then remember, more variations is going to be more headaches, especially when you are a new seller, because there will be a lot of difficulties that you will find, especially in inventory management, in advertising, keeping track of everything, all of that stuff, right? And so Only consider selling in such high number of variation niches where competitors have a lot of variations if you have the capability to launch the same number of variations as your competitors to basically balance out the conversion rate differences between you and your competitor. Because if your competitor has a higher conversion rate than you because they have more variations, more colors, more designs, more sizes than you, then really you are going to lose in terms of ranking, in terms of sales, all of that stuff, right? Because everything is just interdependent on each other. The sales are independent on your product, how many variations you have, your entire listing page, everything is connected, right? So one thing can really affect your entire product launch. Then we have utility versus self-expressive markets, a super important one. So utility markets are function first categories. Buyers look for performance and reliability. Price, reviews, and technical specs matter more than the product design. So for example, utility based markets can be like pet gloves, right? You can see over here, and you remember, you don't want to sell in a market that is completely utility based like this one. Why? Because there will not be many options to differentiate your product, because almost every product looks almost the same on the search engine result page of Amazon. So you can see pet gloves over here. So what do you do then? Well, you look for self-expressive markets. So self-expressive markets are emotion-first categories. The product reflects the buyer's personality, taste, or lifestyle. Buyers care about aesthetics, messaging, packaging, and how the product makes them feel. And some examples of this include wellness journals, pet accessories, home decor items, and much more, right? And why they're better for differentiation, why these self-expressive markets are better, is because in self-expressive markets, there will always be a group of customers whose needs are not fully met, because every customer, they have different personality, beliefs, values, identity. And so this is where you will find a lot of product design options, a lot of ways to basically differentiate the market, right? Differentiate and find those market gaps that are untapped compared to a market like pet gloves, which is completely utility based, right? So I've written in the criteria, it must not be a utility based market entirely. Then we have barrier to entries. Now, a good Amazon niche isn't just about high demand or low competition, but it is also about the barrier to entries, something that makes it harder for new competitors to jump in. These barrier to entries act like natural filters, keeping out low effort sellers and protecting your margins. For example, niches. Now, some barrier to entries can be niches that are hard to find using tools. So you can actually use manual product research methods, something that I've been telling on my LinkedIn, on my YouTube videos as well, right? Because manual product research methods are something that not everybody would do, right? Everybody uses tools to find products, and so you can't really expect to find an untapped product when the tools are showing you the exact same products that they are showing to millions of other Amazon sellers on their database, right? So that can be one form of barrier to entry. The other one could be that the product requires certifications like in supplements, or the product is really bulky to ship or difficult to be sourced from factories, etc. And because the reality is that the harder it is to copy your product or brand, the safer your market position becomes. So I've written over here, the niche must have some kind of resistance to avoid high competition in the future. Then we have don't obsess over BSR, and I think this is the last one as well. Yep. So don't obsess over BSR, and I really had to include that because most sellers obsess over BSR when they're finding new products, and I'm sure you have heard about this. I also talked about this in the beginning of the video, that most self-proclaimed gurus, they will tell you look for products under 3000 BSR, but this is the bullshit, the biggest lie that they have been told, that they have been telling you. Why? Because a niche might have products literally at a staggering 40,000 BSR, which is like huge. There's a huge difference between 3,000 and 40,000, right? So you can actually have a product at 40,000 BSR in the main category that is doing over 100K per month revenue. How? Because sometimes the category in itself is so huge that products even at such high BSRs will be performing well in terms of the sales and everything. This is why instead of looking at the BSR in absolute terms, you should be looking at the historical trend of the BSR instead. Why? Because if the BSR is fluctuating a lot, it means that the product is having a hard time in trying to rank for the niche keywords or getting to the bestseller batch, right? So for example, in this case, you can see the BSR it doesn't have a lot of fluctuations, but it does have a few. But even after having a few fluctuations, the fluctuation itself is not too intense, right? It's not like the BSR at one time is at 2000 and then the other time it's at 300, right? The fluctuations are really They're not too intense, they're really small, and this is normally in almost all the products, so it's not a big deal, right? So really remember BSR, don't look at BSR in terms of the absolute numbers, look at the BSR trend instead, right? And so this marks the end of all these KPIs that I shared with you. I hope you enjoyed it. And before you go, let me tell you, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even gone into cross-market competition analysis, determining price sensitivity of a market, manual product discovery methods, identifying high potential micro niches, keyword roots and outliers, ranking juice potential, product size tier optimization to basically optimize your margins even more, finding unique but proven brand positioning frameworks, AI-driven product differentiation, and much more. This is what it takes to be the top 100 Amazon brand. How do I know this? Well, because I have worked with these brands. In fact, the CEO of a $100 million Amazon brand, Milliard, he personally reaches out to me whenever he needs help in expanding their current product catalog with killer products on Amazon. So you can read his email over here. I've attached a screenshot. And look, this is a guy who has access to every tool, expert, and agency that money can buy. Yet he still chooses me. Why? Because he knows I have walked the talk, period. So here's my exclusive offer just for you. I will help you find high potential market validated products with AI driven differentiation that can make your brand the one and only choice for customers, all in just 14 days. So within 14 days, you will have the product idea, you will have the complete product validation done on the product, you will have your product developed using AI, and all the product market fit tests will be done as well, all in just 14 days. This is how fast I'm committing to it. But here's the best part, like this is not even the best part, here's the best part. I'm not outsourcing this at the moment. I'm not handing you off to some random VA, right? Instead, I'll be partnering with just 5 serious private label sellers on Amazon who want to find their next bestseller and differentiate it to beat current bestsellers in just 14 days. But this isn't open forever, right? Because I have limited time and I can only work with a limited amount of people. So once those 5 spots are gone, they are gone. No waitlist, no exceptions. So if you would like to be one of the 5 first lucky sellers, all you have to do is book a call using this link. I'll leave the link in the description as well. Try us for a month. If you're not blown away, I'll refund you and work with you for free until you are. No fluff, no hype, just real results. And just by the way, before I go, if you want this document, I'll attach another link in the description. You can go to the link and download this document from there. That being said, see you on the other side.